have you here. Thanks for coming. We've got people online, obviously, and people in the room. So today we're talking about AI, and we're talking about, as part of that, the recently announced Microsoft Copilot partnership. We've got three fantastic colleagues who are going to join me in a bit of a conversation, and then we'll open it up for questions. And I'll ask colleagues to introduce themselves in a minute. I think what we're going to try and do is, it's fantastic to see all the interest in, I mean, not surprisingly, in AI, and not surprisingly in what this partnership might mean for the university and the challenges and questions that come with it. So we're going to try and get through as many questions as possible. We're going to try and strike a balance between, wanting to know, the world historical nature of the moment, right through, or the downside of the world historical nature of the moment, right through to when do I get my license and when can I get training and what will it mean for, my second year class in metaphysics. We're going to try and strike a balance between, I guess, those two sets of the two pillars of the kinds of questions we're getting. So we'll do our best. Obviously, we'll gather up all the questions at the end and respond as best we can. So let me just, before we get started, I guess there's sort of three things for me that are really important about, our thinking about AI and our thinking about digital enablement more generally, which is such an important part of our strategy, both for the purposes of our student experience, for the purposes of our colleagues' experience, and for our role as a research-intensive, forward kind of looking university, trying to grapple with the great challenges of our day. And I guess what we're trying to do is, how do we make sure that our students and staff have equitable access to this extraordinary technology? That's one thing we're grappling with, and the Microsoft partnership is one answer to that question, but not the only one. The second thing we're thinking about is, how do we make sure whatever we do in the AI space, we are reflecting on the impact of that work, whether it's on our colleagues, our students, on the communities we serve, on the environment, on the country, and more generally on the world. How do we make sure we're thinking through that and reflecting on it, given the pace of change and given the nature of the challenges that this technology is generating and the political economy, I guess, of AI? And then I think the third thing we're trying to think through is, how do we make sure we're doing this in a way that brings we're all doing this together. We're bringing ourselves and each other along, all the while acknowledging there are some things we don't understand yet, there are some things we haven't figured out. So for me, those are three big themes that we're grappling with at this moment. How do we ensure that we're tackling that digital divide, which is a profound one in society, and making sure that we are on the forefront of doing that? Secondly, how do we make sure we're reflecting on the consequences and impact of AI, not just for ourselves, but for the broader community, and in line with the extraordinary research expertise, which Caroline and Cesar, Mark, and others will talk to us about in a minute. And then third, how do we make sure we do this in the right way, right? That we're bringing each other along, all the while acknowledging that there are things we still have to figure out. Okay, so that's sort of the general frame. So Caroline, do you want to introduce yourself? And then Cesar and Mark.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Caroline J. I have a number of different hats. So I'm head of research in the School of Engineering and a professor of computer science there. I'm also currently leading our research AI strategy group. So I'm interested in how we build infrastructure within the university for helping us to use AI. That's distinct from AI research itself, which is slightly different. And I also do a lot of research into AI. So my research area is looking at how people interact with technology. And of course, at the moment, AI is very current. And so some of my projects are looking at things like computer vision and, of course, generative AI.
Great. Thanks, Caroline. Cesar.
Hi, I'm Cesar Ardito. I'm a lecturer in mathematics. In terms of AI, on kind of two lanes. One is I really worked a lot on creating benchmarks, so stress testing AI on expert topics, in particular mathematics in my case. And the second one is teaching and scholarship focused. So my work has been focused a lot on the impact on our current models of scholarship, what students do, how students perceive it, and also whether some solutions that are proposed really work, and to safeguard mainly our current teaching model in light of the external, let's call it threat, but also opportunity of AI.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. I'm Mark Carrigan. I'm a senior lecturer in the education department, and I'm the co-lead of the digital education group there, and AI fellow at the Institute for Teaching and Learning. And I come to this with two hats on, really. In the first, I study the practical challenges for academic practice. I wrote, I think, probably the first academic guidebook, Generative AI for Academics, about how to use AI reflectively as an academic. But I've also got a more theoretical program of research, which is trying to identify what these things are, what happens when we work with them, what happens when they're part of organizations. So I try and put those theoretical questions into dialogue with some of the practical challenges we have, what we do now, but also where this might be going in the longer term.
Fantastic. So as you say, we've got a fantastic panel. So let me just start off with a really general question, and you can take it wherever you like. And maybe Caroline, will start with you, and then I'll go to Mark, and then come to Cesar. So Caroline, I mean, we've got this partnership. We're going to be offering all of our staff and students access to this technology. From your perspective, what should that look like? And what should that feel like if we get it right?
So I think the first thing I want to start with is that we recognise there are lots of people within the university who are already using AI, right? You know, lots of people who are enthusiastic about it, who are what we call early adopters, who get, you know, the new iPhone or whatever it is first. And then there are loads and loads of people who don't really use it at all. And some of those people are interested in what I can offer them and want to know more. And other people are quite worried about the implications of it for lots and lots of different reasons. And I think what is great, I think, about today and about, you know, the Mentimeter discussion and the things that have started happening already is that we are starting to have those discussions, and we're starting to come together as a community to have those discussions. And so I think ultimately what we want to see in terms of how we use AI within the university is we want to be doing it thoughtfully. So we want to be doing all those things like improving productivity and so on. And I've certainly been using it in my own work for automating things that I used to have to do manually, and that's been great. We're also sort of using it to help us in lots of different ways. You know, can it help expand our horizons, for example? And then we're grappling with those really challenging issues around, we know that, for example, students have access to it and are already using it in various ways. And how do we deal with that? So I think in terms of how we look at this within the university and what it means to us, I think it has to be sort of, there is a new world out there, which we're slowly coming to terms with. I think everyone's slowly coming to terms with it, but it's changing rapidly. And it feels like we're a community that's really able to deal with that together and reap the benefits from it, but also, you know, tackle those challenges together.
Mark.
Yeah, I think new world is a good term to use here, because it is a new world. And at the moment, it's quite a chaotic world. The best evidence we have suggests that 90% of UK undergraduates have used generative AI in some form in their assignments. And my sense of many of our PGT cohorts is that actually that's probably pushing towards 100%. And so this is a very chaotic situation at the moment. And by rolling out Copilot, we're able to make that something where it's easier to talk about, it's easier to reflect on together. And I think that's really important. And it also addresses the equity issue as well. I mean, if the majority of our students are using generative AI, but only a minority have paid subscriptions, like that's clearly a big problem. And it also limits how far we can integrate this into teaching and learning. So I think some big changes are on the horizon.
Cesar.
Yeah, to build on what Mark already said, we are in the brand new world already. We've been there for quite a while. So it's not a matter of us choosing, in fact, to have AI or not, because we have AI and our students have AI and our staff and co-workers and everyone else has AI. But by doing this Copilot partnership, we're doing two very, very important things. And the first is about equity. Copilot is a good model. I know it wasn't. Right now it is. No, genuinely, many people may have used it a year ago and it had a few issues. But right now it's a good model. Perhaps not the best at every task, but there's no such thing, but it's good.
So that's what my son thinks as well. He said, "Oh, Dad, Microsoft, come on." You know.
Well, there are reasons, but as you know, AI changes every month, and there's nothing you can do about it. So forget about what you experienced a month ago and try again. But the other extremely important fact is about privacy, security, and all that. because as we all know, most AI models, especially the free ones, use the data to train, sometimes in transparent ways, sometimes in non-transparent ways, depending on what platform you're using it. But by having a university Copilot with all the reassurance it gives us, which is the same as we have on all our other Microsoft documents, including emails, then we can really start exploring without worrying about that, which is a specialist topic. It's a very complicated topic, and we can take kind of the weight off our colleagues' shoulders and generally start innovating. So a uniform platform for students, but that's also secure. And that has been a big problem even for me when I wanted to propose some projects, and I was like, but what if then this data is compromised?
So Cesar, can I stick with you for a moment? Because, you and I have been in frequent correspondence about the impact this has potentially on assessment. And we had a great discussion at the Senate Board of Governors meeting just before December. And to put it really simply, there are some colleagues who think this is a kind of existential challenge to the very possibility of us vouchsafing for the integrity and quality of the work our students do. Let me put that in the most extreme way possible. It's an existential threat to assessment at the university. There are others, though, who think this offers a transformative opportunity to rethink our assessment, given that our students are going out into a world suffused by AI, that a young doctor coming out of FDMH is probably already facing patients who come in with a list of symptoms that they've looked up on ChatGPT or Google, and they're having to sort of think about how they interact with that kind of patient, think about the knowledge systems that are now being created. So talk to us a bit about, you're a specialist in this area. How should we think about assessment, and how should we think about the integrity of our students' work in this world suffused by AI?
So just to start, to build off something you said, my doctor uses ChatGPT, and that's good. Research proves it's good. It improves the quality of what they do. Of course, if the doctor just took what GPT says and gave it to me, that would be bad.
You might want to. You might want to change your doctor.
But we are but we're talking about a doctor seeing what GPT says and then using their own acquired internal knowledge, and that is the existential threat, because the point is, if our assessments are able to be completed by AI, then it's on the short term, maybe it's a bit unfair to, let's say, honest students that do not use AI as instructed, and then maybe their scaling brings their results a little down. But on the long run, their degree loses the value it has, because if we believe that there is an objective productivity reality that our degrees give, which I think we should believe, if we take the utilitarian point of view, if you allow me, well then these degrees would lose value because they don't correspond anymore to knowledge acquired by students. So I always said the first thing to do is to secure assessment. I completely acknowledge the point of view where the skills we teach may be different and are certainly different in the new world. But I think that's more of a long-term conversation. I don't think we should suddenly flip everything on its head and say, okay, now we have AI, so let's not teach polynomials anymore. It's a mathematical thing. Because AI can deal with polynomials, which it can. I think we should stick to what we know how to do. So we have, centuries, 2 centuries, in fact, as recently celebrated, of human knowledge, very based on the human element, based on a lot of interaction.
Yeah.
And what we should do is keep teaching the skills we were teaching and just ensure that what we are doing is still valid, still certifies that these skills were acquired. And of course, this may mean, in many cases, to change the assessment in the sense of it cannot be fully remote anymore. It cannot be something that the students are trusted to completely do on their own, or even if guided, there needs to be a way for the university to mandate some steps that make sure there's some human element involved, so the students actually contributed to part of the project. It's really hard to say this in general. My take is that every lecturer should be given the instruments to make this decision for their own course in the best way they can. But of course, if the lecturer believes that AI detection technology works, which it doesn't, and the body of evidence is huge, if the lecturer believes that they can tell whether a task has been written by AI or not, again, research tells us that this is false. Most people cannot tell.
We crossed the Turing test, 2023?
Yeah, precisely. But even more advanced users can rarely tell. You can tell some of them, the most obvious ones, or if the lecturer believes there are some things AI cannot do. Cannot really reflect on the journey of learning. It can pretend it did in very convincing ways. Then we have a problem. So this Copilot partnership also lets people experiment with AI a little more. And since it's a good model, they can realize that there is a problem maybe in their own assessment and make their own decisions. So
I'm going to come to Caroline in a second about research, but Mark, just given this is pedagogy, AI and pedagogy is in your wheelhouse, what's your take?
I think that question of people believing they can tell is a really interesting one, because we are picking up on something. It's a very common experience now to see a kind of superficial fluency in student assessment that wasn't there previously. But I would argue that when we feel we can tell, what we're actually picking up on is a kind of surface level polishing. And we can't know what deeper use of LLMs has been taken place. And we need to get better at distinguishing between the many different ways in which students use AI. Because what matters is how they use it, not whether they've used it. There are some uses that make very little difference to the learning process. There are some that contribute to it, and there are others that really hinder it.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Give us an example of something that contributes to our students' learning, and then an example of something that doesn't, that hinders it.
So on the most extreme version of hindering it is someone taking an essay title, putting it into ChatGPT and copying and pasting the response. But the evidence suggests that it's really a minority pursuit by students. This is not as widespread as we sometimes worry that it is. I think the more creative uses of it are all about ideation. They're all kind of downstream, upstream of actual writing. Talking to pieces of work, so putting in a paper the student has read, but then having a conversation with the model about the paper to go deeper into it. An example from my own students in a panel we ran last year was when she was unable to get started on a piece of work, she described the task, but then she asked ChatGPT to give me 10 questions I should mull over to help me think about how to get started on this task. There were really creative uses our students are making of it, and there are some very problematic uses as well. And we need to create a space in which we can steer students towards creative uses and away from the problematic uses. And if we do start from the assumption that we can tell and that any sign of AI use is intrinsically problematic, we're not going to be able to have those conversations with students because they won't trust us.
Okay. So Caroline, I want to shift now a bit to research. And, there's this concept of, the AI paradox. On the one hand, AI is the cause of many, potentially, arguably, allegedly, of many of the world's biggest challenges, whether in climate, whether in conflict or social disadvantage, economic disadvantage. On the other hand, AI could help us tackle some of those problems in new and potentially creative ways. So how do you see AI being used by our researchers? I mean, maybe a structurally similar question to Mark, and to say, what are the ways that AI is going to help sort of support our research, generate new ideas, new questions, new possibilities? And what about the ways in which it's going to hinder it? And what do we need to do about that?
Okay, so yeah, this is it's a really interesting area. So firstly, the first thing I want to say is there's a really good article in Nature that came out quite recently that talks about if you want to use AI tools in your research, just Google AI tools, Nature research, and you'll get it. So for those people who are not familiar with the sorts of ways in which it can help you, that's a really good starting point, and it's just useful to tell the community about that. So how has it helped? So obviously it's been used in I'm going to say science and engineering. It is being used a lot in the humanities space as well for a long time for basically dealing with really large amounts of data that would be virtually impossible to do, without using some kind of automated process. So without going into the technicalities, there are lots of different ways of doing this, but probabilistic AI has been used for tens of years for doing this. So sort of making lots of discoveries in things like physics and astronomy. And then we've been using it, those technologies more constructively for things like understanding hypothesis generation. So understanding, what might constitute a new material or what might be a really good basis for a new experiment. And again, it's being able to do that through data, right? So being able to trawl through lots of data about chemical reactions and that kind of thing, and then say, actually, if you want to solve this problem, then this might be the thing to explore. So fantastic uses from that perspective. And of course, then you go away and you do the experiment, and it can help you design the experiment now. It can do things like that. And then in some cases, we've got a robot that actually does the experiment. So, you've got kind of the pipeline is coming now. But I suppose, so that is fantastic. There are two cautionary notes. So one that I'm really interested in personally as a computer scientist is that obviously we use computer code for analysing quantitative data quite a lot. So people will write data analysis programs, and obviously they'll use things like AI and stuff for, and we have to be really careful when it comes to analysis, right, when we're doing our stats, because where people are using it to write code and they don't understand the code it's producing, it might not be correct, and we need to start to get better at making sure that's robust and we're sure about our results. So that's something I'm personally kind of interested in, and how that fits in with the process, because we know from research that this is an issue at the moment. So that's one thing that's a problem. And then the other thing, which is really interesting, which I was reading about a couple of days ago, is that in some ways it's massively accelerating scientific perspective progress, but actually it's only in certain areas, because of course it does this based on data, and where it has data you can accelerate progress, and you've got more data and you can accelerate more progress in that area. But actually it kind of narrows and silos and funnels research into particular areas if we just rely on these tools. So that's a really interesting challenge to us, I think, as researchers, is kind of, we still have that role at the moment of going, where are the gaps here though?
So I guess it's that idea that in the age of AI, genuine originality and creativity just becomes even more important, because AI is all about pattern recognition and probabilistic, anticipation, isn't it, based on existing data. So it's and universities have to be the place where that space for originality and creative thinking is given room to grow. And I think that's going to be a real challenge, isn't it? Not for all kinds of reasons, but that's got to be part of it. Okay, lots of concern also. So great. So we've heard sort of the kind of two sides, as it were, of the agony and the ecstasy of AI in education and research. Let's think about future employment and the impact on jobs more generally. So Mark, maybe start with you. If you're just reflecting on the students you're teaching now, what do you see as our responsibility in terms of preparing our students for, they're not only here we're not a job training center, but of course for our students it's super important to think about the careers they're going into. So how do you think about that in terms of your students, preparing them for that new world they're entering into?
Well, we teach digital education, which has a big technical component to it, obviously, because it involves using software and using technology. But we also stress purposeful reflection. So can you explain why you're using a tool? Why are you using it in this way rather than another way? And that's really important, because with employability, there's a risk that if we seize too rapidly on the idea of technical AI skills, we lock in things that would be quite out of date fairly rapidly. I mean, take ChatGPT 3.5 just 3 years ago. Prompt engineering was necessary to get a good enough output. With the models we have now, you don't really need to think and write in structured ways to get a good enough output out of them. And so the pace of change means that our curriculum for AI skills always risks getting slightly out of date in terms of the actual workplaces our students will inhabit. And it also risks obscuring some of the continuities with what we already do. If we can get instant answers, then asking good questions becomes absolutely crucial. We are writing to these chatbots, and the degree to which that's writing is often overlooked. If you can write fluently, if you can write in a domain-informed way, if you can write richly, you can literally get more of the complexity out of these chatbots. So the things we already teach our students don't become obsolete. In fact, they become more important than ever for employability.
So Cesar, for you, given the students that you're teaching, whether in mathematics or other subjects you teach into, how do you think about the kinds of skills that you're equipping them with, or we should be if we're not equipping them with?
So I completely agree with Mark in that I think that what we're teaching right now in terms of general skills, learning objectives, should largely be unchanged, and that just because it's been built on centuries of good practice, it works. And also because ultimately, if we're building real experts out there, because university's job is also to train the most expert people on the topic, then we need some kind of mirror to the AI, whatever it may be, that is still able to verify. So maintaining human expertise is a challenge, and where, if not in universities, where maybe we're a little less worried about quarterly results or financial issues. And the other very important thing that Mark also mentioned is that the modes may change a little. And I'll give you one example from mathematics. Automated proof verification, which is a way to make sure that when you do a theorem, it can kind of machine verify that the proof is correct. We don't have this in general. The proofs are assessed by peers who judge their formality. This is now becoming quite big. And right now we don't train students on that because it was quite a niche area up until now. And there are starting to be questions of, should we do this? So of course that requires a little adaptation of the curriculum, but the core skills we teach, the mathematical knowledge that they acquire in their head and the ability to do exercises, prove things, that will not fundamentally change. And I don't think it should change, because anything you offset to AI, you've lost in a generation. And I don't think we should be losing anything here as human beings.
So Kellyanne, Kellyanne helps, runs our student employment service. I mean, what do you, just briefly, we've got a microphone for Kellyanne, what are you, listening to Mark and Cesar, how does that sort of line up with what you're seeing from our employer colleagues and partners?
Absolutely, thank you. Hi, everyone. I think the first point I'd like to make is that this isn't about replacement, it's about balance. And when we look at graduate recruitment, we can see that employers are using AI and have been using AI for a number of years at that front end in terms of sifting applications and the volume. I think now we are seeing such an increase in applications. It's a huge challenge for employers. We're seeing the labour market contract by about 5% year on year across the top 100 employers, and we're seeing applications increase by about 23%. And some employers are actually reporting double the amount of applications that they've got now coming through compared to a couple of years ago. And a lot of that is due to the quantity of applications that our students can put forward. So I think our role as universities is to equip our students to not only use AI, they are time poor, they're using AI to support the application process, but there should really be an emphasis on that human element. And recruiters are still testing for that. So those shortlisting decisions are still a human-led decision. And our job really is to prepare our students for that reality. So that includes ensuring that through the applications that they're making, they're getting that kind of the skills, attributes that they're requiring at university in that application process, that it isn't just a copy and paste. So it's twofold, really. It's around preparing for the application process and preparing for that human element when applying for jobs. And that's something that I think we've still got a job of work to do, really, on that.
We were joking the other day that we should encourage our students to slip in spelling mistakes into their,
Absolutely.
so that the algorithm goes, wow,
yeah,
there's a human being here.
Employers have genuinely fed back to us that, the rate of application, the volume that they are getting, years ago it used to be, we aren't going to shortlist because we've spotted a spelling mistake here or a grammar error here. Whereas now on the flip side, it's actually, this must have been written by a human because it's got a spelling mistake in there. But that's a genuine challenge that employers are facing. So it's really interesting. I think we're seeing that shift from supporting students just to navigate AI and use AI in applications, but also to make sure that we're giving them human skills development, because a lot of the recruitment and selection is coming back to that in-person mock assessment centres, assessment days, interviews in person. So it's ensuring we've got that balance.
I mean, it sort of reinforces, I guess, what all three of you said, but especially Mark and Cesar, about not resiling from those core human-centered skills that universities have been focused on for a few hundred years now. I mean, there's obviously, we can do them better, but those are still that's a core value that we continue to offer.
Yeah. And it's still something that recruiters are testing for in the recruitment process.
Yeah, good. Okay, let's move to questions now. We've got lots of questions on Mentimeter, which we'll come to, but let's start with questions maybe in the room. So who would like to kick things up? Lots more things to talk about. We'll bring Caroline and Cesar and Mark in their areas of expertise, but let's kick off questions in the room. Who would like to ask the first question? Otherwise, we'll go straight to Mentimeter. Yes, go ahead.
Is it on? Okay. So thank you for the discussions and for organizing this event. I'm Boris, a lecturer in the computer science department. So my first question is more about the data that we create by using these tools. Where is the data? Is it stored in Europe? Is it stored in the US, since Microsoft is a US company? How do we manage export control?
Good. So maybe PJ, I'll ask you to answer specifically about where the data is stored and secured.
That was an easy one, passing the microphone. So the data is actually stored in the same place where your emails and your Teams and OneDrive and SharePoint data is stored. That's here in the UK. The way that we're storing the data that is produced, it gets saved into your OneDrive file. The enterprise service agreement that we've got with Microsoft indicates that we have to keep the data here in the UK, and we've got data protection rules around that as well. So succinctly, here in the UK.
Good, thanks. Other question in the room before we go to Mentimeter? Yeah, I think there's one right in the center.
Hi, thank you. Duncan, when you started, you said of the three kind of core things that you wanted to make sure that we were thinking through, the third one was how to ensure that we're doing this together. Mm-hmm. And to go back to where I think Caroline went, in terms of we have both early adopters and we also have, I'm going to call them AI skeptics. How do we do this together, whether in terms of training or other things, in a way that everyone feels like they're part of it, and especially for those who are feeling skeptical, that they're not feeling that they're being sort of marched into this against their principles or their pedagogical will?
Yeah, great question, and I'm happy if any one of the panel have a view about this. But I guess the first thing to say is, look, this is as much about training and support as it is about the technology. So there's a lot of thought and work being done right now as we speak, including led by Caroline and others who are here and who are online, in terms of putting in place the kind of training and support that's going to be accessible and usable by students and staff. And that's work that's happening now. So that's been a really important principle all along. We weren't simply dropping the technology in and saying, going for it, we're actually going to provide structure and support as far as we can. And that's going to be an evolving process. We also are doing a lot of work led by Jen and Sarah around the guidelines and policies we need in order to ensure people are clear about what happens in the classroom, what happens in the laboratories, or what happens in various parts of the university. Again, that's work that had already started, but we now need to accelerate and update. But in the same way that states are struggling with the regulatory environment, I think we're going to have to be continually returning to that sort of guideline policy environment to the extent we'll need to. I think just given the nature of the technology, as you said, the difference between the platforms today compared to even 3 years ago is quite remarkable. And then the third thing I'd say is no one's going to be forced to use AI. It's not something going to appear necessarily in your job description overnight. But, I was reflecting on, we had Simon Johnson, the Nobel Prize winner, alum of the University of Manchester, give the Cockcroft-Rutherford lecture last year. And he told this, he gave an analogy with the emergence of the combustion engine and Ford in the US. Yes, jobs change, but more importantly, tasks change. Whether jobs change is something that we can't really predict yet entirely as to what that means, but tasks will change. So no one's going to be forced to use AI, but I'm sure you're having the same experiences as I am, which is increasingly it's there in front of you, and for various reasons you're using it, whether at the university or in other parts of your life. So it's certainly going to be the case that there will be lots of opportunities to use AI, and in some cases it might be that there are certain processes which are relying on AI, and people are going to be, as a result, engaged in it there. But this isn't, we're not AI evangelists per se, but we are trying to lean into this technology, understand it, figure out how to use it responsibly, and figure out how to use it to benefit our colleagues and students. So it is a bit messy. I'm trying to be careful not to say, oh, well, you can just completely opt out of it. I mean, that would be unrealistic to say, but certainly people are going to have choices to make about how they use it and when they use it. But even that will begin to get probably a bit gray in places as we just live in a more AI-suffused world. Final thing I'd say is, one thing that's important for me about this partnership is also about agency. It gives us a chance to make some choices and decisions rather than just sit back and let it happen to us. It allows us to exercise a bit of agency over how we want to use this technology in the institution. And the first foundational basis for doing that is that everyone has equal access to it to begin with. And then we kind of go from there. Okay, let's go to Menti.
Yep. So the top question on Menti at the moment is AI relies on rare earth minerals, mainly being harvested through exploitative means from countries in the global south. How does this align with the university's United Nations Sustainable Development Goal commitments?
So it's true. I mean, this relies on a lot of rare earth minerals as well. So it's a challenge we face in just about every technology. If you drove to work in an EV, came, on an electric bus this morning into work or going home this afternoon, we're facing the same question. I think for me, to put it really simply is, yeah, we have to ask that question and ask, well, what can we do about it? What kind of conversations can we have here to address those challenges? We know that in a world of geopolitical competition as well, it's getting increasingly challenging to make sense of that. I'll come back to the AI paradox. I think the very same technology, which is using rare earth minerals, and in some cases coming from conflict zones and in very challenging circumstances, that very same technology potentially can help us think through how we address those challenges. So I just think we have to own the fact that this is a feature of just about every new AI-related piece of technology, and not just AI, but just digitally related technology that we have, and we're going to have to grapple with that. And where else but a university should we do this? As I said, this is not a conversation that's necessarily happening in the boardrooms of the various tech companies, but they certainly can happen here. So I think we have to grasp that. I don't know, Caroline, do you have a view of? It sort of goes back to that AI paradox sort of question.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So first of all, I think it is impossible for us to not engage with the technology, and it is absolutely the case that the technology can help us with finding answers to those questions. So I think that's a really important point. I think as well locally, what we're thinking about doing locally is really important. So we have an AI, what is currently an AI sustainability working group, and it's interesting. So it's we have various sustainability groups within the university, and this one's called AI. But actually, it's looking at all of our computation. So it's very difficult to separate these things out. So Alejandro, who's in the front row down here, is chairing that group. So thanks for coming along. And what that group is going to be looking at this stuff locally. So it is true that every decision we make about how we live has a sustainability implication, right? And so some people, we all make different decisions, whether to fly or get the train and these kinds of things. So we always have to be making those decisions. But I think data is really helpful. And so one of the things that the group is going to be doing is, and we've got various other projects around the university doing this as well, is looking at things like how do we use our compute resources? How can we be more efficient? Where people want to be more efficient in computation generally, how can they do that? And so there is this kind of data collection going on. So where people, they want to make informed choices about that they can do to help, support that.
And I guess the other, Alejandro, did you want to say something quickly? Because you're chairing and give you the microphone. Just briefly, maybe say a bit more.
Well, I basically fully agree with what we have been saying. At the end, I think everything that you do have an impact. So and if we want to go in that direction, we have to be. What we have to do is try to tackle those impacts and try to reduce them. That's the key thing, and that's where the university and we as individuals as well can have an action. No, in that sense, for example, like we have to analyze, like when do we really need to use artificial intelligence, and maybe in some cases, it's even easier to just do a web search, and use it responsibly, Don't use it for, it's a stupid example, but not using it for doing memes, for example, because that has an impact, Use artificial intelligence for what is really, really needed. From the point of the university, we have to measure, how much this increase or impact or not, because maybe we are doing things more efficiency and therefore we are consuming less energy and we have less emissions, That's what we have to see. And if this increase the amount of electricity that we are using, we have to take the actions because we have clear commitments, and those are not going to change, And finally, also, we have a partner here that is Microsoft, which actually is where the majority of the environmental impacts rely in the data centers or data centers for Microsoft, So we have to work with them. We have to have them accountable for the very important commitments that they have as well, you know, and that's how I see it from an individual perspective, from the university perspective, and also for all partners. You know, that's the triple vision that I think we have to consider.
Good. Thanks, Alexander. I mean, one thing we might want to think about is what are the sort of research projects we can sit alongside the partnership that maybe measures, you know, increases, decreases in our environmental footprint. Maybe another question from Menti.
Hello. Yep. So the top one now is, how much did this partnership cost?
So let me try and be very careful about this, because the actual number is commercial in confidence. But let me say it is of a factor less than what we would be paying if we were simply renewing our existing Microsoft license. So in other words, we're spending less on the Copilot licenses in this next iteration than we would have if we were simply renewing the 1,000. What did we have? 1,000 licenses originally. So we're going from 1,000 to 65,000, and we're spending considerably less per year over the terms of the deal than we would have. So that's basically, I think, the best way I can put it. Maybe another question from, we'll go right at the back, and then we'll come back to Menti. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nuno Pinto from Planning Seeds. My question goes back to the data, which is, the question is Copilot kind of a University of Manchester knowledge entity that will learn from what we do? We are a big university, we are always trying to collaborate more. We don't know what each other do, but it knows, right, to a great extent. So is this something that we're about to use, like a collective knowledge base, our own model that will help us improve our own internal process and knowledge about ourselves?
Yes. I mean, the short answer is absolutely yes. I mean, I'll ask, PJ can talk about organizationally, but maybe Caroline or Cesar or Mark can think about this. There, as I understand it, I mean, there are massive opportunities for us to learn as we deploy and use this technology, both in a classroom environment or a laboratory environment or a research project environment. And part of the challenge over the next couple of years is really taking that opportunity and leveraging as much as we can. So absolutely, it is a collective knowledge project. And in some ways, well, as we know, doing it in the way we've done it means we've got the necessary kind of security around that data that we're sharing. But absolutely. So maybe start organizationally, then I'll come back to you guys to think about ways in which we might do that.
I've actually got two parts to the answer. The first part is from a Copilot perspective, that has access to your data. It doesn't have access to the university's data. It only can access what you can access right now. As we look at future phases, we're going to be looking at something called agentic AI, and that's where agents start to look at other systems that they've got access to as well. But from a knowledge management perspective, that's where we're going to be relying on agentic AI, and that's in future phases. But for Copilot right now, think of it as an intern and then as an ally to you.
Do you have it? Yeah.
Yeah, I actually think this is something that we need to be really careful about. So the way I see is the best way we can use AI right now is an extension of our own mind, which is big in terms of privacy, right? Because I wouldn't want any of you to read into my thoughts or private notes or diary. And I think AI should have exactly the same level of privacy, which, as far as I understand, I've asked this before the panel, is guaranteed. I'm still agree around FOI, freedom of information requests, so maybe you can pitch in on that. But as far as I understand, it's at least as private as emails. And so, of course, if you were trying to build some kind of collective mind, then you would have to give up some of that. I don't think AIs right now are mature enough to do it. And I think it's very, very important to preserve the privacy of one's interactions with AI, because it enables them to be genuine. It enables me to honestly brainstorm truly without worrying about what someone may read in the future. So yeah, that's just
your inbox might be private, but mine isn't, alas. But Mark,
who knows?
that privacy is obviously crucial, and if you are a routine user of a language model, you will usually experience it as something very private. But I think there's a middle ground between that privacy and the sort of collective intelligence you're hinting at, Nuno. which is particularly in terms of publication. So, for example, there's so much scholarship that gets done at Manchester, and I don't think we're very good at learning from the scholarship that's been done about Manchester and how we could opt into ways of pooling knowledge in particular areas. I find really exciting. For my ITL projects, I'm trying to do that over the next year and a half with research that's been done about generative AI empirically at Manchester to see what we can learn collectively through that. And I think there's huge opportunities. It's never going to be off the shelf. And the idea of off-the-shelf automation, I think, is quite dangerous. We're going to have to do creative contextual problem-solving work to see how we can leverage this in practice. But the fact we do have access to all this resource, this material internally, there's some huge opportunities here. We just need creativity in how we address them.
Caroline.
Yeah, can I give an example actually of how we're starting to use it internally? It feels mundane, but also like it saves a lot of time. Thinking about I think where we're thinking about things like chat, absolutely, we need to be careful about, those interactions and so on. Where it comes to just like documents that sit within our system, whether that's papers on Pure or, so I've used it quite a lot for sort of looking at stuff that's held internally at the university, and it gets you a little bit further than a search engine. So I do some research in this area as well, looking at how we use it for discovering data. And it's able to sort of retrieve documents that are relevant to your and tell you a bit about those documents so you know whether to read them or not. So that's quite mundane. But we're actually starting to use it for interrogating, exactly as Mark said, the sort of papers we're doing. So the experiment we've done recently is one of our AI Pathfinder projects, is looking at the papers that we have in the university and trying to understand how people are using our research facilities. Like, what research facilities do we actually have? Things like that, Where do they sit? Who's using them? And then we can think about what's the impact of that research? Can we use that to generate narratives about our impact, rather than having to rely on people answering emails? So there are all these kinds of things which we wouldn't have been able to do previously, which gives us this really rich information about the university and this opportunity to provide that narrative to the external world as well.
Maybe just say, you mentioned the phrase AI Pathfinder.
Right,
Maybe
yes.
just explain what that means.
Okay, so some of you may remember a while ago, there was an opportunity to provide ideas about how you think that we could use AI within the university for helping to speed up processes or helping to uncover knowledge or, all of these kinds of things. So lots of colleagues submitted ideas to that, and we're now starting to operationalize some of those. And I believe there is another call that's going to come out at some point. Yeah, Ricky's nodding, good. And so yes, this is a really great way that colleagues can engage with the potential for this. So if you can see a problem that you think needs fixing, it's an opportunity to sort of raise your hand, and you don't have to do it yourself, right? You don't have to be an expert in AI. That's the important thing. But we have a team of people who can potentially look at that, and that's how we use AI to tackle those problems that actually really cause issues for people, or, people who are doing their day-to-day jobs say, oh, only I could help with this thing. And so that's one of the pathways for us to improve the way we do things.
Good. Okay, we'll go back to Mentimeter.
How do you square this decision with the established and emerging evidence of harms both to learners' cognitive development and to young people's social and emotional development?
So I think we have to, it'd be very interesting to see what Mark, in particular, this is an area of your expertise, but Cesar might have views on this too. I think we have to sit with these two things. So first of all, what are the harms and what are the dangers that are posed by this technology in relation to young people's well-being? And shouldn't we be actually testing those hypotheses and actually using this opportunity to try different ways of deploying the technology in less harmful ways, if indeed we do feel that there's harm being done? Universities should be the place where those kinds of discussions and those kinds of projects are being pursued, both in terms of testing the claim that harm is being done and then thinking of responsible ways. This is such a big topic in the broader public culture, and there's so much debate and so much, I think, lack of clarity about it. You've seen some extraordinary, and this is not only an AI comp sci thing, this is also a public policy thing. So you've got, in Australia, banning young people, slightly different issue, from use of social media, not so much Copilot or ChatGPT, but from social media. Do these policies work? Should we be adopting those kinds of policies? So I think universities are places that have that multidisciplinary capability to actually tackle the questions. And again, it's, do we want to lean into that, or do we want to step back and watch it from the sidelines? I think we want to be engaged. But Mark and Cesar, you guys work in this area, so...
Yeah, and we need to remember that the harms are not contingent on what happens in university. Academic staff often fall into seeing AI tools as things that students relate to mainly as educational instruments. And the evidence is really clear that most students using them see them as kind of friendly presences in their life. You know, increasing numbers will ask for advice, treat it as a friend, treat it as a kind of source of emotional support. And the complexity of the relationship that young people are developing to AI in everyday life has emerged very, very quickly. And when we think about the kind of impacts on learning, we have to take account of we have students coming in who have already been using AI for 3 years now. And that problem is going to grow with time. There's a socialization issue. And if we respond to the real issue that AI can be used in ways that are harmful to learning and cognition by stepping back from that space, we lose the opportunity to try and steer that use in more helpful and constructive directions. It's a huge problem, but the technology I do not think is intrinsically harmful. But there are modes of relating to the technology that are quite common, and we have to understand what's driving that to ensure we don't reproduce those modes, and to understand how we could encourage and support students in using them differently. This is something we can do, I believe.
Cesar, do you have a view?
Yes.
You've got a slightly more skeptical view than that, I'm sure.
No, actually, I believe that is not on us. So AI is, again, an external factor that we're reacting to. And kids, children, students, college students, and those who come to us have been already exposed to it. We only had a short-time window where we had students who were new to AI, and that is gone as of last year. So I don't think we should be viewing this partnership and giving students a better way to experience AI, at least in terms of how good it is compared to the free models, and also how secure it is compared to privacy, should be seen as a bad way. Then, of course, again, it's up to us to figure out in each context whether it's good or bad and how to integrate it. And I think it's up to the individual course leads, even, because every course is different. And that is an important point, because right now staff is not yet AI literate enough, we want to say that, and we need to bridge a gap really quickly. But once we've done that, it may be, of course, that there are harmful uses in which we design a course in a way that steers students away from AI. Maybe maths is a bit hard, but maybe in some philosophy or critical thinking courses, you would like the student to think with their head in some occasions at least. And maybe there are other situations in which you do something else. So the body of evidence seems to suggest that guided usage improves outcomes. And unguided usage harms them slightly. Right. So I've seen many, many papers on this, but we're still figuring it out.
So guided outcomes is sort of the frame we should be maybe reflecting on. Questions in the room? We'll come back. Yeah, right at the back.
Great. My name's Nick, down Internet Scholar. Duncan, you said that you know the agony and the we haven't heard the agony, and I would like to say this in the room. LLMs are built off the fact of our culture and are labeled by third world workers working under exploitative conditions. So in that sense, I'm not sure there is an ethical AI. I'm not sure if there's an ethical bank. I know the bank will have it, but I don't need choice. But I would like to come back and question our data.
Sorry to interrupt. I think I misheard you. Do you say built on the death of our culture? I just wanted to understand. Excuse me. Got my the death of our culture.
Theft. Sorry, the theft.
Sorry.
The theft.
Slightly less bad, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think those are the agonies.
Yes.
Of AI. I do have a question about the data. Does this deal with Microsoft mean that, or maybe I'm being naive and they already had access to my OneDrive and everything in it?
So I think the answer is no, but PJ, just confirm that.
Microsoft are not looking at your emails or your OneDrive.
And they're not feeding their model.
And they're not feeding their models. So since before I started the university, we've got a Microsoft M365 agreement. The best way to think about Copilot is just when we activated SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams over the last 5 years. This is an add-on to there. Your data is not leaving our instance. However, things do go wrong. If we need to allow Microsoft to access our environment, we've got strict controls on how that happens and protocols, and that could be data engineering, etc. But that's done under our supervision.
I guess the point about large language models being built on exploitative work practices in the global south, I mean, again, I think it's similar to the question about rare minerals. I mean, we can lament that and we can criticize it, but then I guess the question is, what do we do about it? And are there other ways of building or engaging with LLMs that are less reliant on those kinds of exploitative practices? But at the very least, we can have those conversations and discussions here and highlight them in ways that they might not otherwise be in other parts of the culture. So, the point about theft of culture, I'm not sure I quite get, but yeah, the point about, workers in the global south being exploited in the process of those models being built, I think is absolutely something we should be cognizant of and thinking through. I'm not sure it's a reason for stepping back from the partnership, but I think it's an important thing for us to acknowledge if indeed it continues to be true, which I think in some cases it is. I don't know if you guys have a view.
Just about the theft of culture. So the way LLMs are built is they're trained on a huge amount of data, which mostly consists, at least initially, of the so-called common core, which is data scraped from the internet. Now there are deals with, for example, Reddit, famously, which provides training data to some AI companies. And there have been documented instances of some big companies training on content that they did not quite have the right in terms of copyright to use.
Two of my books are on that.
Okay, yeah. So that has happened. But whether that means, I don't think this means they're built on theft in a strict sense. And there are also, but there are opinions. This is very much a debate. It's a debate in the courts, where some courts have ruled towards this is fair use, some courts have ruled this is not fair use and you should be compensated. But the point is, of course, this is a new era, because if I read a book from a library, or if a friend lends it to me, a book which I don't have the rights to reproduce, which none of us does when you buy it, and then I use some of that knowledge. In academia, we cite it, right? But that may be way more implicit. I don't think I cite every book I've ever used about mathematics. I don't cite my high school book when I write a paper yet. Trust me, that played a role. So it's a new gray area. And as you acknowledge, I completely agree with you. This is not a reason to stay away. We should be mindful of this. We should demand accountability. We should demand to know where the training data comes from. But I think built on theft is a bit too much. At least that's my 2 cents. There have been some questionable practices involved in it. The vast majority of the data does not come from theft.
Okay, I know we're running out of time. Maybe we'll go to Menti and then come back. We'll come back in the room for the final question here.
Yeah. So last one from Menti. Does this mean any impact on jobs? Is the university planning to use Microsoft Copilot to replace roles?
Like I said, I go back to that sort of insight that Simon Johnson, I think, made. I think tasks will change and evolve. And I think we're thinking about AI in terms of, as Caroline said earlier, how do we make sure we're focusing now on how do we make sure it helps people do their jobs more effectively, and how do we make sure it is improving people's experience at work and improving productivity. The medium and long-term impacts, I don't think any of us can really predict at this stage, but certainly tasks will change. I mean, I think about, PJ is now hiring engineers now that we didn't even imagine existed 4 years ago. And there are jobs that existed 4 years ago that are no longer required because of the way that the technology has developed. So I imagine that's also going to be something that's happening in other parts of the university. But again, I think this period we're in now gives us a chance to reflect on that in a really open and transparent way. It has to improve the experience of our students and our colleagues in some way. If it doesn't, then I think we've really failed. But we have to think that through in a really responsible and transparent way. Okay, final question, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Kennetha, and I'm an MSc Digital Transformation student. I don't know if students were allowed, but please don't kick me out.
It's okay.
Don't kick me out. But I'm also a student ambassador, and from the digital transformation perspective, I guess we're learning about AI implementation and adoption, and how to advise companies and all that stuff. But a lot of what I've heard today, including the AI pathfinders and the guided use and evolving guidelines seem to be staff-led. So what room is there for students to feed in on that?
Really important,
And are you open to looking for like student champions or student reps, student AI reps, anything like that at all?
So, the meeting we had just before this earlier today was with the student union officers precisely on this question. And so students are involved on every important committee that is looking at this issue. And actually, I'll ask Sarah, who's leading our work in this area, say just who you are, Sarah, briefly. And then
Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Dyer. I'm the new Associate Vice President for Teaching Excellence and Innovation. Absolutely, it's really important. And lots of the work that we're doing with staff is around supporting them to foster conversations with their students in disciplines and modules. I believe there's some student ambassadors being created, paid roles that are being created as part of the Copilot program. I'm sat next to Jenny, who works in the library, who's got the library student team. And we were talking earlier about how we're going to kind of engage with those kind of pre-existing networks. So obviously with the student union, but also with our student academic reps to make sure that they're kind of feeding in. So I think it's really easy to kind of focus on the staff bit, and it's just, it's so lovely that you're kind of, that your voice is the last kind of voice that we hear, really. But they're absolutely kind of central to everything that we're doing in this space.
I think the challenge, and we'll finish up here, like as I said it earlier, we do have to move at pace to kind of bridge this gap between bringing our students and colleagues up to speed with the opportunity they have now with the technology. But that doesn't mean we need to rush it. If I can make a distinction between moving at pace and rushing, I want to hang on to that distinction. We need to move at pace, but we need to make sure we're bringing the community with us as we do it, so that they too can feel that they're moving at the appropriate pace. Okay, well, thank you very much, Caroline, Cesar, Mark. Really appreciate the expertise and insight you brought. Thank you all for coming. I know there are lots more questions on Menti, and I'm sure in the room. Please pass them through. There'll be many, many opportunities to engage in this conversation over the course of the next few months and years ahead. You've heard reference to the AI Pathfinders. You can talk to Caroline or Vicky over their way, Vicky, who's helping lead some of that work. As I said, we want to do this together, even when we're trying to figure stuff out we don't know the answer to yet. So thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Great. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much.